Hello, everyone. Welcome to Racial and Social Justice Beyond the Dome. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Dan Yu, and here with Lily Crawford, who joins from the board of the Notre Dame Club of Pittsburgh. Tonight, we welcome Matthew Skinner, Executive Director of the Richard C. Failla LGBTQ Commission at the New York State Unified Court System, formerly the Executive Director of the LGBT Bar Association of Greater New York, which is known as Legal. And thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the Notre Dame Club for putting this series together. I feel a little, having heard of some of the past speakers or guests you've had for this, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome that you went from like the coach of Notre Dame women's basketball to me, but I'm hoping to try to fill some big shoes tonight.
No, this is going to be great. We're excited for you to be here. Thank you so much for taking the time. By the way, love the tree and the dome in the background, the Notre Dame sweatshirt. You came prepared. Yeah. Love to see it. Love to see it.
Yeah, I had a little too much fun getting everything situated for my background here.
Excellent. All right. Well, so I'd love to start off with, where did you grow up and how did you get to ND?
So I am from Ilion, New York, which is in upstate New York. It's a small town. Basically, if you point dead center on a New York State map, that's where Ilion is. If you ever heard of Remington guns or typewriters, that factory was started here in Ilion 200 plus years ago. So that's sort of our claim to fame. We're basically equidistant from Albany and Syracuse. So we're really right in the middle of the state. So I guess fast forward to, senior year looking at colleges. Notre Dame was really my dad's dream school. And so I kind of applied for him and ended up getting in and went out to South Bend, really the spring break of my senior year of high school. I really, through my whole process and applications and all that, was really thinking I would go somewhere else. This was really just a piece of paper I put in the mail and didn't think would pan out or ever amount to anything more than that. But went out and saw campus and fell in love with the place. And that's sort of the short version of the story, but it's the rest is history, I guess, as they say. So ended up attending Notre Dame, and it was a truly wonderful, transformative experience for me, as it is for so many alums. So I'm certainly glad that I did, but it was not. It's one of those strange, those stories that so many of us have about how life turns out in a certain way that you weren't expecting or planning, but it was sort of meant to be, I think. So that's my story.
So then, when you went to go visit, you had come from, kind of middle of New York, and you're going to the cornfields of Indiana. I mean, what was it like when you first arrived?
So I actually went to visit Notre Dame with there's a sort of also sad part of this story, which is my dad was diagnosed with cancer Thanksgiving of my senior year of high school. So I really was trying to cheer him up by sort of indulging this whole Notre Dame thing. And he was hospitalized by the time of April of that year. So I ended up going out to Notre Dame with my uncle, my wonderful uncle, who, because it's like a 12-hour drive, we decided to take the Amtrak. There's an Amtrak in Utica, which is not far from Ilion. Take the Amtrak all the way there so we wouldn't be exhausted from driving. We figured we could sleep, most of the way or part of the way there, and we'd be fresh when we got there because we had just a day basically to do everything we wanted to do and then immediately come back. So the train part of the rationale for the train didn't exactly work out because excuse me, if you have ever tried to like sleep on an Amtrak, it's much harder than you think, at least for me. So we didn't really sleep the whole way there. The Amtrak is also notoriously delayed. Took much longer than it was supposed to get there. We ended up getting there like literally in like the middle of the night, or it was maybe beginning, before the sun had come up the morning that we were doing our campus tour. And I don't know if anyone has ever been to the Amtrak station in South Bend, but it is an interesting first introduction to South Bend. It's really sort of a one-room shack, especially if you get there when it's dark out. It is sort of like it's not by no means is it like the beautiful campus of Notre Dame if the first thing you see of South Bend is the Amtrak stop. So I remember getting off that train and just thinking, oh my God, we just spent like, almost 24 hours on this train to get here. It was like very like scary and disappointing. It's hilarious to me in hindsight to think that was the first, moment I had of South Bend was this little small tiny building on the outskirts of town, and walking off that train and not thinking, and there was no way in the world that I was going to end up going to college here just based on that Amtrak station. But thankfully we got in a cab, we went to campus, and it was all much better. So that's my story about my first trip to Notre Dame. The campus tour and all of that transpired after getting on campus was much better than the train ride and the initial arrival. Sure. But that's my funny how I discovered Notre Dame story.
So then you get to Notre Dame, you matriculate and you're there, and you didn't come out till much later, till senior year, right? So who did you connect with when you first got to Notre Dame?
And I'll try to not focus on it too much, but basically my father died at the end of May of that year. So I really arrived at Notre Dame and not a great moment in my life. It was really a very difficult, the most difficult moment in my life, for better or worse. And so I really sort of put, my sexual orientation to the side for a while and was just working on sort of rediscovering who I was, rediscovering, happiness and joy, and trying to rebuild up my self-esteem, my sense of being, all of that sort of was my main focus at the beginning of college because of this sort of horrible thing that had happened, unfortunately, my senior year of high school. But I will say, I in retrospect, I owe Notre Dame so much because it really did. I really do thank Notre Dame for, in so many ways, helping me recover from that whole series of events, and really finding a group of friends at Notre Dame that totally changed and transformed my life in a way that I really did sort of, become a full, happy, a fully formed human being again, after sort of being really broken by what had happened previously. My sophomore year, there was this wonderful, I ended up being what they called at the time the social concerns commissioner for my dorm. And it was sort of the progressive, lefty, do-gooder kind of activist students sort of were drawn to this particular dorm leadership role. And we had like a retreat the first week, or the weekend before that semester started. And I remember at that retreat really meeting a group of women who really became sort of my best friends and are to this day still my best friends, some of my best friends, and really getting through them getting involved in a whole different bunch of activities that really sort of were of great interest to me, and very fulfilling for me, and very exciting and interesting. And the 4 years I was on campus, there was really a hotbed of, as there always is, right, at Notre Dame, there was a hotbed of controversy and drama over various activities and student events, principally the Vagina Monologues and the Queer Film Festival. And so a lot of gay students in particular were involved in putting these events together, and all of the firestorm of resistance and approvals and all of the things that went along with it. So through meeting these women at this retreat, I really got opened the door for me to all kinds of very exciting facets of student life that became sort of my main interests and activities.
Gotcha. And so you have this close group of friends, and you're doing all of this all of this kind of social work, right, within the campus, and so I guess socially, did you feel any pressure or awkwardness to go to like SYRs?
I don't remember they certainly are awkward for LGBT students, right? Like any kind of formal dance, whether it's high school or college, in retrospect, are awkward, sometimes even painful events. But I remember more really going to those events with the women going as like with friends as my dates, and having a lot of fun with them, regardless of the sort of heteronormativity, if you will, of these events on campus. I had more trouble with some of the sort of hyper masculine aspects of like frosh show and things like that. I remember as being more awful for me than like the SYRs. My dorm has this tradition where like the first football game of the year, everyone gets sort of waken up in the middle of the night, and you have to like run around campus like wearing body paint and like trying to wake up every dorm. And it's very fun for some people. It was not very, and some people were in on it and knew that this was coming, and I just was not. So I remember that being like a really horrible thing that I wish I did not remember. But it was intended to be good fun, but some of that sort of stuff was less up my alley than other students. But the SYRs and the formals, I remember fondly. I don't remember them as being totally painful or humiliating, but I also wasn't really out until my senior year, so I mostly just kind of went with the flow as it went with those kinds of events where you were expected to bring a date.
Yeah, and so we were talking a little bit before this, but Prism ND, which is the current LGBT group on campus, wasn't formed until 2013. So what kind of group was around when you were there, and were you a part of it? And what was the vibe like around that on campus?
Yeah, I'm forgetting the exact years, but we had the Standing Committee on Gay and Lesbian Student Needs, I believe, at least part of my time, and then it became the core council. We also had Outreach ND. So there was also there were sort of groups and structures in place that were sort of the precursors to the even more prominent and more sort of vibrant, if you will, more official university respect for than we had at the time. But there was a very, and I think this is a recurring story I've heard from other alums from other eras. It's sort of a matter of regardless of what the sort of official university structures are when you're a student, it's a matter of, and I think it was much more difficult for people in previous eras, but it's always a matter of just finding the group of LGBT students that are there in every area, that have been there in every era. And it's certainly was much more difficult for people in decades prior to when I was a student. But once I really found that there was a really vibrant, exciting, diverse group of LGBT students on campus, when I was a student. And not everybody was involved in the activism necessarily or the official committees, but once I did find them, they were, totally transformative, inspiring to me to sort of continue on my journey. I mentioned the Queer Film Festival. There was, huge drama about whether we could even show the movies. I give great credit to my friend Liam Dacey, who was instrumental in that film festival when I was there. And we also had the Gay Fine by Me t-shirt campaign, the orange t-shirts. And it was very sort of exciting and empowering to even just wear that t-shirt on the days that we wore those t-shirts. So you see like the evolution through the years. Even I'm now coming up on my 15-year reunion next summer, which is insane. But even the evolution in the last 15 years has been really amazing to see with PRISM and the 4 to 5 movement and the various student body presidents, Brian Ricketts, that have been openly gay. We continue to see great progress on visibility, recognition, but there's also still a lot of room to grow. So we got to keep our feet on the gas while we talk about the progress.
Right. So when I was there, and I'm a little older than you, but it was in the late 80s, the LGBTQ group wasn't even allowed to meet on campus, right? And that I've learned recently through you that was considered progress than even from before.
Yeah. I've met alums who have talked about a PO box being the way that they connected on a PO box at the Notre Dame post office, and you would send a letter to this PO box and hope that someone would respond to you, but you also didn't, the identifier for the PO box was nothing that had LGBT or gay or anything like that in its name. So it was all very secret and dangerous even for people to be out. So certainly we've progressed from the PO box, but I know there's still a tremendous amount of pain and trauma and that a lot of alums feel around their connection to Notre Dame. I'm been really proud to be a part of our LGBT alumni group, Gala ND, which has made tremendous strides in even the past 10 years or so that I've really been involved with it in terms of working with leadership in the alumni association to the last we give out this award every other year called the Julie Award, and we've been able to use the official alumni association building on campus for those award ceremonies. I was telling you this in our prep call, but I went back. So the Julie Award in 2019 we gave to Mayor Pete, and I went back for that award ceremony. And I remember we also had like a little reception with him before the award ceremony, just a couple blocks from campus at someone's house. and a very small group of us got to sort of talk to Pete. And this was 2 weeks before he launched for president. So I remember, and I actually came back 2 weeks later to go to his launch too, because I was sort of like, this, who the heck knew how the 2020 primary was going to go? But it was all very exciting. And the fact that he was from, the mayor of South Bend, was just totally mind blowing to me. I remember, and I'm not trying to get overly dramatic here, but I remember driving back to that train station that weekend and just sitting in that parking lot and thinking about how if you had told me, 15 years earlier when I was sitting in that train station that I would be coming back to be at this reception with maybe the first openly gay president of the United States, who is also the mayor of South Bend, I would have, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, it was like, so for all of the baggage Notre Dame has with its with the LGBT community and with its LGBT alums and current students, there's also this amazing group of alumni who have been totally resilient and have totally done amazing things to change the culture on campus, to change the policies on campus, and so I'm so proud to also be part of that group and to hopefully be a small part of that change.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second. And you're not just a small part of the change, you're a big part of the change. Why you're a guest here. So you graduate from Notre Dame, you go to law school, and eventually you make your way to New York City. And now when you were in law school in 2006, New York State handed down the verdict against marriage equality. And that had to be pretty disheartening.
There was, so this was actually just a few weeks after I graduated from Notre Dame, and I went straight through to law school the following fall. But it was like the end of May of that year in 2006. Our state high court, which is called the Court of Appeals, had its sort of, a lot of states had their own sort of cases seeking marriage equality through the courts before it went into the federal courts and up to the Supreme Court in 2015. But in any event, it was a 4-2 decision against marriage equality. Even here in what we think is a very progressive New York State. And I remember not knowing anything I do today about the movement, about the litigation strategy, about constitutional law. Really, I had taken an African-American civil rights movement history course either my junior or senior year at Notre Dame, and I remember reading Loving versus Virginia in that class, or because of that class, becoming aware of that case. And you can't help but read Loving versus Virginia as a gay person and not think 2 steps ahead and ask, why doesn't this apply to gay people? It's this beautiful, I highly encourage everyone to read Loving versus Virginia if you never have. But in any event, so I just assumed that as this issue came before different courts in the country, of course they would see that this is obviously the obvious implication of what had come before would lead to marriage equality victories, and it was a huge setback for the movement in some ways that the New York High Court did what it did. And I remember really questioning, like, why am I going to law school? Why, I really don't want to be part of a profession that produces something like this. Right. So it was really a sad moment for New York, and a sad moment for equality. And thankfully, in the years that came, things turned the other way. But it was one of those moments where I think a lot of the future looked very, very much in doubt at that particular moment.
Sure. So fast forward 9 years later, we have Obergefell, right? The Supreme Court justice decision, right, that approves marriage equality, gay marriage.
Yeah, no, it's just incredible. And I went to, just to tie this back into Notre Dame too, by that point, I was working for an LGBT organization. I went down to attend the oral argument. And if you know anything about the US Supreme Court, especially in big cases, it is very hard to get a seat inside the court to watch the argument. So I got there, I believe 4 days early to camp out outside. And it was April, but it was like a freezing kind of April. So it was like really a horrible 4 days of like shivering on the grass outside the Supreme Court. But it was totally worth it. And to connect it to Notre Dame, one of the plaintiffs it was actually a consolidation of 4 different cases from Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, and Michigan. And one of the plaintiffs that I met outside the court, just sort of by coincidence, was Greg Burke. And Greg, who I understand you're going to do an episode with in a few weeks. So again, talking about alumni connections to LGBT history, it was just amazing to me that I met this other Notre Dame alum who was, intimately involved in the case that finally resolved this issue, thankfully, as a win, as a victory.
Right. So I don't know if the audience necessarily gets that, but he was the plaintiff, right? So he's one of 8 plaintiffs, right? I believe it's 8 plaintiffs, right? So, and
if it was like, it has something to do with the filing number of the Kentucky case versus the Ohio case. But if things had just been slightly different, the case name that everyone knows would have been Burke instead of Obergefell. So really? It's just amazing that. And Greg still gets a lot of credit despite whatever name is officially on the case. And I know he knows Jim Obergefell as well, but they're both amazing symbols of equality for our community.
That's great. So you're an associate here. You do some clerk work, and then you eventually get involved with Legal, right? So the LGBT Bar Association, right? And so I guess for the audience, what do they do?
Yeah, so I was working at a big, it's called Big Law, for people who are familiar with the legal profession. But they're basically there's all these very big, prominent law firms in New York City, and a lot of folks in law school. The big goal is to try to get a job at these firms because the salaries are just amazing for people fresh out of law school, and it's very, very helpful for paying back law school loans and all of that. But it's also sometimes just the amount of hours you have to work to succeed at these firms is very difficult and not necessarily for everybody. So I was an associate at one of these firms, and not loving the work I was doing, not feeling very fulfilled. But I had gotten involved with the LGBT Bar Association, and had gotten on was a board member by that year in 2013 when their executive director took a new job. So it was just a couple of months before our main fundraising event, and they were really in need of someone immediately to take charge of the organization. So I was really just in the right place at the right time. They thankfully gave me the opportunity to jump in and do this. At that time, it was also just a couple months after the Windsor decision, the Supreme Court case 2 years before Obergefell, which struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. So it was a very exciting moment for the movement. And so it was like, it just seemed just like this perfect, exciting opportunity for me to sort of leave corporate law and work in the nonprofit, work for a nonprofit LGBT organization, and sort of really dive into much more exciting, fulfilling work for me.
So then the work that you did there, right, as executive director of Legal, and that you were there for a few years, right? So I guess what was one of the coolest things that you did there?
So I'm most proud, or particularly proud of the legal services work we do, or Legal still does. They have a weekly clinic at the LGBT Community Center in Manhattan that serves hundreds of people a year with pro bono legal services. While I was there, we were able to bring on our first full-time staff attorney, legal director, who really took that part of the operation to new heights. So in terms of what we were able to be, the amount of people we were able to help, and the amount of progress we were able to help achieve as an organization, was just awesome. And 2013 to 2017, while I was there, as you mentioned, it's when Obergefell happened. So there was this like huge moment for the movement at large too, while I happened to be there. So I was very lucky again to be in the right place at the right time to sort of see history happen. Another thing that was just awesome, and I mentioned our state high court earlier in our questions here. A vacancy came up in 2017, and at the time, Governor Cuomo, for the first time, picked an openly gay judge to sit on the high court, Judge Paul Feinman. And so I was able, because I was so involved with the Bar Association, and we were obviously extremely supportive and excited about this possibility of someone like Judge Feinman getting picked after all these years, and a historic pick. So I was sitting behind Judge Feinman in the gallery of our state Senate when they voted on him and approved him unanimously. So it was sort of this full circle moment in some ways, from our state high court being this source of a huge defeat, to hear an openly gay judge joining the ranks for the first time of that very important bench. So that was another cool thing.
So that's the highest court, what you would call the Supreme Court, right? Of the state of New York. And so for the audience, how important is it to have Judge Feinman furthering the ideals such as quality in that seat? Like his role there?
I think it's just about really, it's not necessarily about specific results necessarily in any given case. There's not necessarily a gay, in 99.99% of cases that he's involved with, there's not a gay result or an LGBT aspect to any case. And even if there is an LGBT aspect, there's not a guarantee that he will vote a certain way. But it was really about opening hearts and minds to, showing LGBT law students and lawyers in the profession that there was no position in the state that was sort of out of bounds for them. And another thing that we all remember from that 2006 decision is that it probably would not have been written in such a demeaning way to LGBT families if the judges on that court personally interacted with someone from the LGBT community on a daily basis. So one thing that is so important, not just in the courts but in all parts of society, is having LGBT people be anywhere that I'll use, this is a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, but she said, women should be everywhere that decisions are being made. And the same goes for all minority groups, and including the LGBT community. And especially, these state high courts are the final word on family law, and usually the final word on family law in the 50 states. So having an LGBT person bring their perspective and their identity to the decision-making arena, where the final say is often the final interpretation of the law of that state is fleshed out, is so important and key to continuing the progress we all want to see.
Sure, it's literally being in the room where it happened, right?
Exactly, Hamilton.
Yeah. So then you networked and found your way to work back to the state of New York, which is your role today. So tell us what you're doing there.
Yeah. So the chief judge of our state in 2016 created what we now call the Richard C. Failla LGBTQ Commission. And it's a committee of the court system that's within the court system itself. I work for the New York State Unified Court System itself, and most of my commission or committee are the LGBT judges in our state, and now we have people at all levels and in all parts of the state. Most of our judges are in New York City, but we also have some very prominent judges upstate as well, and on Long Island. A lot more work to do, but we're also very proud of how far we've come in terms of having LGBT representation on the bench here in New York. And we do a combination of policy work and also educational work. So we try to advise the court system on improving the policies that affect LGBT litigants and employees and judges within the court system itself. And we also, in pre-COVID times, went all around the state to do in-person trainings and in all the corners of the state, from Chautauqua to Suffolk County. So I've driven all over the state in the past 3 years, and that's been one of the cool parts of my job, is meeting people from all over and interacting with local activists, local members of the community in all different parts of the state, and trying to provide them the tools and knowledge to provide LGBT individuals who find themselves in our courts, to try to help them have a positive experience when they are needing the courts for whatever issue might be happening in their lives.
Right. Well, I mean, it's, from housing discrimination, which still happens, right? All of these issues. So even with 14th Amendment of the Constitution, right? SCOTUS decision, U.S. versus Wonkamark, right? Which, not just birthright citizenship, but protected all persons equally, right? Equally under the law. There's still a fight, right?
Yeah.
It's still a fight every day to make sure that the law is upheld.
Yeah. No, and it's, and I'm sure I don't need to tell folks here, there's a lot of, anxiety about where the U.S. Supreme Court might go with its newest member, so I think there's, the law is not as straightforward, and sometimes the answers are not as obvious as you might think, even with the words in the Constitution or in a statute. Just this past summer, we found out 55 years after it was passed that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 also covers LGBT employees in the workplace. So that was a huge victory, and it was really the first sort of specific victory that covered transgender people. And so that was another amazing step forward. And I should add, just to connect it back to the LGBT vortex that is South Bend, one of the earlier plaintiffs, her case didn't make it quite all the way to the Supreme Court, but a college professor at Ivy Tech Community College in South Bend, Kim Hively, who was fired from her job as a math professor. She was actually her case that went to the Court of Appeals in Chicago was really a landmark and eventually led to that victory we won at the U.S. Supreme Court this year. But South Bend again is played a really important role in LGBT history.
Go figure. South Bend still in the news.
Yeah.
So and now you've met with Mayor Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, and Chasten, and a few times, right? And so what's it like to hang out with them?
You know, I first met them at a birthday party. This is a crazy story, but if you've ever heard of Chris Hughes, who is a co-founder of Facebook, his husband's name is Sean Eldridge. And they are very sort of politically prominent players in New York and national politics. And Chris Hughes, for a time, bought the New Republic. You probably heard about all the drama around when he was running the New Republic. But in any event, his husband, Sean Eldridge, had this big birthday party in 2016, shortly after the Democratic convention, and a lot of prominent people who were just leaving the convention ended up at this birthday party that night. So I ran into Pete and Chasten then at this birthday party in 2016, and was just so excited to meet them because I'd read, he had, I think, come out the previous summer, maybe in 2015. You know, I was so excited to find out that South Bend had a gay mayor and someone who was as exciting as he was. And so I initially met him just briefly at this birthday party. I became like Facebook friends with Chasten. You know, little did I know what would be happening 3 years later with those two. You know, it's just one of those, another amazing coincidences, you know, moments in life that that you just don't expect to pan out the way it did. But as I said, 3 years later, we gave him, you know, our gay alumni group award 2 weeks before he launched for president. So I came out to South Bend twice in a month for those two events, and obviously it didn't turn out the way he hoped, but I think it was still a very cool moment in history, and I'm sure there are still big things in store for him to come.
Well, you must be watching. Well, I am as well, watching cabinet appointments pretty closely,
Yeah.
right? So
No, I know, and I think even if there's not a cabinet position for him, I think, excuse me, President-elect Biden has a soft spot for him. Mm-hmm. I know, like right after he, you know, dropped out of the race, I remember the day afterwards, you know, he went to endorse former Vice President Biden, and they, you know, you could just sort of tell on TV that they, you know, that he sort of sees the future, I think, of the Democratic Party and people like Mayor Pete. So very much interested to see what might be in store for him in the days, weeks, months, and years to come.
Right. So, well, how can our audience know a little bit more about the work of the commission?
The commission has a great website. If you just Google sort of Failla Commission, our previous newsletters are on there, which you can sort of just scroll through and see lots of pictures and information. We just did we were planning on doing our first conference this year, and unfortunately we ended up having to reconfigure it to a virtual conference that we sort of pre-recorded on Zoom. And but we did a very cool conference about the evolution and history of LGBT family law in New York, and also did a great tribute tribute panel to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg about her specific LGBT legacy. If people are interested in that, that's on YouTube for anybody to watch. So we've beefed up our online social media sort of virtual presence this year, as everyone has, to try to stay connected with people during the pandemic.
Got it. Well, that's great. I would like to open up the floor to the Q&A. So again, everybody, for the Q&A, please go to the Q&A button, type your question in, and hit send, and we will see it. If anybody has any questions. So Matt, actually, there's the news this summer, right, about transgender people having more rights, right, and within the workplace. Does that also apply to federal jobs? Sometimes there's differences there.
Yeah, and the EEOC, which sort of primarily enforces, or is very, very much, the federal agency involved in enforcing Title VII, really started this conversation that resulted in or ended in the Supreme Court this summer, earlier in the decade, and started doing their own internal reevaluation and reinterpretation of the meaning of Title VII, and in a series of cases announced that they were going to start officially including LGBT people within the group of people they felt were covered by the law. And that really kickstarted or gave a lot of momentum to the cases that would ultimately get litigated, like Kim Hively's out of South Bend, and then Gerard Bostock's out of Georgia. His is the case that ultimately went all the way up and was decided this year. But again, it was a consolidation. So there was a case from Michigan involving a transgender employee at a funeral home that was also decided as part of in one decision. And that was really as I said, a huge moment for another piece of the puzzle that people waited a very long time to see happen. When you think back to last year, there were huge celebration for. Let's take this out. I think I just heard the sign that my battery.
Oh, technology.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I just heard the beep that indicates these died on me, but just take them out. In any event, lots of events and celebrations last year, especially in New York City, for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And if you would have ever told people at Stonewall that we would get marriage equality before we got employment protection, they would have thought that was crazy. So it's really a funny piece of how history developed, and sometimes in not predictable ways that things happened in the order that they did. But in any event, I think many of us were very relieved to see that work get done finally this year.
Well, it's got to be so important for people to be counted, right? And it's not just the label; it's definitely not the bathrooms, right? And the being counted, and then representation, right? That's ultimately, I think, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Right. Again, anybody, if there's any questions, please type into the Q&A box. We are happy to have any questions answered. So the commission, is that so it's part of the state of New York? So you're a state employee, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Now and before legal, that was a 501c3.
Correct. Yeah. So I've done a little bit of everything since law school. I worked. I clerked for a federal judge. I worked at a big private law firm. I work for a nonprofit, and now I'm working for the state of New York, as you mentioned. So tried my hand at everything for a little while, I guess you could say, in the past 11 years since law school.
So, well, anyway, I just want to thank you for being a part of our show here. So thank you, Matt Skinner. What a pleasure to have you on with us. Thank you to the audience for joining us this evening. So it's been great having you here. Yeah, no,
this was a delight, and I'm happy to just discuss my my story at Notre Dame, and also some LGBT history there and in New York and nationally. And I hope everyone continues to stay safe as we all await our vaccines here, and wish everybody the happiest of holidays during this very strange year.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. So to the audience, this has been another episode of Racial and Social Justice Beyond the Dome. Technical direction by Lily Crawford. I'm Dan Yu, and this has been a production of the Notre Dame Club of Pittsburgh. Follow us at ND Pit Club on Facebook, Twitter, ndpitclub.com, and Notre Dame Pit Club on Instagram. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good evening, and go Irish.